Have Andrew come up and take over and guide us through the battlefields of Europe. Now, please join us afterwards to look at brochures, books, have a coffee, have some cookies, and to say hello. Andrew?
Thank you, Rowan. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming. Here we are at last. It's been a while that I've been waiting to come here and speak to you. The timing is perfect. Any later in November and I'd be covered with November scruff and I'd have to stand up here in front of you. And they just turned the clocks back, so now I don't have to stay up past my bedtime. It's perfect timing. Yeah, so as was mentioned, about a year ago, I was lucky enough to be involved in a trip to Europe, specifically to study the Canadian involvement in the First and Second World Wars with a Canadian flavor to it. And it was not my first time there by any means, but I knew I wanted to go back and really go in depth into some of the trials and tribulations of Canadian military over there during the wars. I was lucky enough to go in 2010 with a group of high school students when about 10,000 Canadians, high school students, went over there and did the 65th anniversary celebrations of the end of the Second World War, which was a fabulous trip. The trip I went on last year was just for teachers, and the Juno Beach Center sponsors this trip every year. So the slideshow you're going to see tonight is pertaining particularly to that trip that I took and the places that we visited on that trip. So without any further ado, we'll get started. So what is the Juno Beach Center? Oh, before I start, has anybody been over there? How many people in the audience have been over there to see some battle sites or grave sites in Europe? Okay, so I don't want to take anything for granted tonight. I'm going to give you enough information so that you kind of understand what I'm talking about. As you know, the wars can be four-year-long courses at university. We won't go quite into that depth, but I'll have to give you enough information so you understand about the places that I'm talking about. So what is the Juno Beach Center? This is the Juno Beach Center. It was built in 2003 by the wishes of a veteran who was a veteran of the D-Day landings. After he had gone over there for a trip on one of his anniversaries, he thought we really should do something to educate Canadians about what actually happened here. So he came up with a vision, and this is the result of his vision, the Juno Beach Center. It's part museum, part education center, and part memorial to the veterans of D-Day. This is the gentleman I was talking about. His name is Garth Webb. He was an artillery soldier with the D-Day landings. He raised funds tirelessly over the last 13 years of his life, 20 years of his life, and he died in 2012 at the age of 93, having seen his vision come to fruition. So shortly after that place was completed, they said, we really need to do something for educators in Canada. We need to give them some information about what Canadians did. We need to instill the desire to promote remembrance with students in their classrooms across Canada. So they did that by creating this PD tour every summer. This tour is a way to reach out to all Canadian teachers to bring them to Europe to actually experience touring around where Canadians fought and died. It's a natural extension of their educational and memorial mission that's stated in their program. And it has run every year since 2005 with teachers from all over Canada. We go back to our classrooms being able to offer the students really in-depth knowledge about what we've experienced. So this is where we went. We flew to Paris on July 27th on an overnight flight, landed in Paris, and immediately got on a bus. We drove for 3 hours to the north of France, to Arras, and we started touring World War I grave sites and battle sites. Basically what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to talk about World War I for a little bit, Dieppe for a little bit, and then the D-Day landings. So there'll be 3 parts to tonight's presentation. So we spent a couple of days in the north of France visiting World War I sites. Then we drove to Dieppe and we spent a night in Dieppe and talked about the raid, the Canadian raid on August 19th, 1942. Then we drove down to Bayeux, which is just inland from the Juno beaches where the Canadians landed on D-Day, and did day trips from around there to all the significant areas in that part for World War II. And then we flew home to Canada. So we had mostly high school teachers on our trip. There were 22 of us, 3 elementary school teachers, middle school teachers, grade 8 teachers, and 2 people representing the Juno Beach Center, and 1 historian who was like our teacher on the trip. So every time we got somewhere, he sat us down to sort of explain why we were sitting where we were sitting and what had happened there, which was quite valuable for some of the teachers who weren't as well read as some of the other ones. So it was a great opportunity to have a sort of on-the-spot classroom. So, day 2, this is our arrival. They count, you know, tour guide companies are like, your travel day is your first day of the trip, right? So we spent most of our time in the north of France. We landed in Paris, we drove north to Arras, came down along the coast through Dieppe, down to the D-Day beaches, which are located here in lower Normandy. So let's have a little lesson on World War I. Green are the good guys, as far as we're concerned. Pink are the bad guys. We're known as the Allies, they're known as the Axis. World War I, the causes of it are hugely complicated, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that. Suffice it to say that you can see that Germany was a little worried about being caught in the middle. France on one side, Russia on the other side. They did not want to be caught in a 2-front war, fighting with an army on both sides of the country. Weakened your army. So what happened was the staff officer from 1891 to 1905 was a gentleman by the name of Alfred von Schlieffen. And knowing that this problem of the 2-front war existed, he came up with a plan, and they named it after him. It was called the von Schlieffen plan. The plan was, if we invade France and subdue it very quickly, we don't have to worry about keeping our army here. We can then move our army over and fight against Russia. The rationale behind that being that Russia being the big country that it was, it would take longer to mobilize their army and would give them some breathing space. So beat France, then take the army to the other side of the country and fight against Russia. So it's the only plan Germany had. They thought it was a great plan. In reality, it was a bad plan. It fell apart right away. It was like a big wheel turning, and you can imagine that the soldiers on this outside arrow here had to march for miles to keep up with the rest of the army. By the time they got to Paris, they were exhausted. They couldn't keep their food lines, their ammunition lines, their supply lines coming to them. And the whole thing petered out. They missed Paris, and by virtue of that, they got turned back, and that's what established the trench warfare, the Western Front as we know it today. Okay? It became a war of attrition and a stalemate between 2 trenches. Partly because this plan did not work as it was planned to work. So here we have the Western Front as it evolved in 1814. This is France, Paris right here, Belgium up there. It snakes across most of Europe. And the red things that you see on there, where little X's are, where the Canadians were mostly involved in the First World War. We were established and sort of attached to the British Army for most of the war, and that's where they were stationed and fought. The French were along the other parts, and the territorials were along the other parts. So, we drove and we visited Beaumont-Hamel. Now, Beaumont-Hamel, in terms of the war, we can consider it as part of the Battle of the Somme, which took place on July 1st, 1916. Beaumont-Hamel was just a little tiny bit of the offensive in the north end of the line. However, it's significant to Canadians because that's where the Royal Newfoundland Regiment fought. They were in the reserve there in that battle. And it is now a Canadian historic site. If you go there, it's a Canadian park, historic site. And we have young university students, history university students from Canada can go over there and work over there, provided they're bilingual. So it's a great little gig for them to go and live in Europe for a few months and learn a little bit about the history that they are taking in school. So Beaumont-Hamel looked like that during the war. Mud, no trees, devoid of just about anything, except a few trenches and craters. Today it looks like that. That's a panorama across what was the battlefield. Let's have a little closer look at that. You can see that the trenches and the craters were left intact after the war, and the grass just grew over them. So when you walk there, it's just like without the mud, walking through the battlefield as it was. So here we have a barbed wire emplacement at the front here, where they would have strung the barbed wire, and the lawn maintenance crew hard at work at the background there. Nobody's allowed to walk on the grass at these places because there's still live ordnance buried underneath. Okay? If a tree blows up, I guess that's okay. Better than people. Scars are still evident, so you can tour through that whole thing. Okay, there's some of the trenches there. It's very, what should I say, serene there. Okay, the trees are growing, it's beautiful there. This was the actual trench that the Newfoundland Regiment was stationed in. They were in reserve at the back of the front lines. They were only to be called upon should things go terribly bad, and things did go terribly bad for them. As they left their trench later in the battle, they ran into all the wounded coming back from the front, from the actual no man's land, and it became a big, huge traffic jam in the trenches. These guys tried to jump out and run across the top. Of course, that didn't work too well. So halfway down, we're looking back towards our lines now. You can see how the soldiers would have been silhouetted against the skyline there at the top of the hill. This was the only recognizable landmark on the whole battlefield. There was one tree that stuck up out of the mud and the mire. The Germans had been using it for artillery practice. It made a very convenient target for them. It also made a meeting place for our soldiers trying to get across the battlefield. It's one spot that they could make for and see amidst all the chaos that was going on. So a lot of guys made for that tree, and they were killed there because the Germans knew the range perfectly. There's one of our interpreters, Sylvie, telling us about the tree. She's a university student from Quebec. So, the battle ended, the Somme ended, and shortly after the war in 1925, based on what happened there, they thought they better put a monument up to the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. So, they built this nice monument with an elk at the top. How they ever let those people walk around the battlefield, I'll never understand. I guess nobody died. They were all there for the dedication. That's what it looked like in 1925 when they dedicated it, and that's what it looks like today. All nicely treated, beautiful, beautiful spot, despite what happened. And they have a little plaque there that says, Newfoundland's 2,500 miles that way. The ironic thing about that whole issue was that Newfoundland wasn't even part of Canada during the First World War. They didn't join until 1949, right? So here we have this Canadian battlefield memorial site dedicated to a province that wasn't really with us at the time. But anyway, I think it's a worthy cause. Okay, so from there, we left and we went just down the road. This is just like a couple of miles away. This is called the Thiepval Monument, built in 1920s. The Battle of the Somme, as we know it, is sort of characterized by what happened on July 1st, 1916, but there were several significant battles that took place around the Somme through the whole course of the war. In total, and I bet this number's wrong too, 72,195 Allied soldiers are missing without a known grave from all those battles. The number's staggering. So in a memorial to them, they built the largest war memorial in the world. The thing is huge. These are people standing in the archway in this picture here. So it gives you some sense of the scale of the size of it. The names are all etched in the walls. This is just one section of a wall. I don't know if you can see that, but there are probably, I would say, 10,000 names just in that picture alone. And that's just one small section. Oh, I guess it can't be 10,000. There's only 7,000 out there, but all right. Tom, my friend there, has taken a picture of some of the names on the one wall underneath the arch. And in the back, there's a cemetery. And I don't know if you can see from this picture, it's a little bit smaller. The graves on the left are different from the ones on the right. These are steel crosses, and the other side has white stone. So one's British and one is French. And every war cemetery in Europe has a great cross somewhere in the cemetery as a central figure. So you can see the great cross at the back. People come and lay memorials. This plinth, it's hard to read in this picture, every one of the cemeteries has a big cement plinth like this that says on it, "Their name liveth forevermore," every single one. These were all re-slaved by a school that had been there just before we got there, with messages of thanks to all the soldiers who were engraved there. Okay, so then we spent the night in Arras. The next day we drove to Vimy Ridge. This is sort of like the holy grail of Canadian pilgrimages to war sites in Europe. The monument itself, dedicated in about 1936-35 by Edward VIII. It was the winning submission in a competition by artists and sculptors. Was made by a man named Walter Allward. And it survived the Second World War. Hitler thought it was a magnificent thing, so he didn't want to destroy it. So it survived the Second World War. It's built right at the very top of the ridge, and it too is a Canadian heritage site. I think I'm going to skip that. We've got a lot to do today. So that's sort of how the battle was fought. Here's some signs around Vimy when you pull up to the parking lot. We're about 11 kilometers from Arras and 9 from Lens. And again, we've got unexploded ordnance all over the place there. Nobody's allowed in except sheep. So everything's fenced off except the walkways that you're allowed to walk on. And the monument itself is fabulous. You can't help but be moved when you walk up to it. It's just, there's something about the atmosphere there that gets you right there. Yeah. The figure on the wall on the sort of the downhill side is Mother Canada. And she's standing there mourning, overlooking the Durie plain, mourning the loss of her youth, the young men that were killed in the war. And then, of course, there's all the other figures around that represent justice and truth and longing and all those things. Fabulous, fabulous. Again, names etched in the bottom. There's 11,000 something names on that monument. Everywhere we went, we got a history lesson. So that's us sitting on the steps, just in front of Mother Canada, hearing about how the battle went. Now, this was the first time in the First World War that the four Canadian divisions got to fight together as a combined army. And in the scale of the war, it was a very minor battle, but to Canadians, it was one of the most important battles of the war, because we did something nobody else could do. From this point on in the war, April 9th, 1917, until the Armistice Day, we were sort of known as the elite shock troops. If they needed something done, by virtue of what happened at Vimy Ridge, we were called upon to solve the problem. And we got to fight together as a fighting unit from that point forward. So when you go to Vimy, you can see the monument, you can walk right up it, you can take your picture on it. But they also have, on our side, where we were entrenched, some great tours. You can walk through the trenches and see the mines, craters. These are not real sandbags, they're all cemented in. So you don't have to worry about it caving in on you or anything. And if you're really lucky, there's some of the landscape. Again, it's not like it was during the war because the trees are just beautiful. There's tours to tour to. So thousands of men lived in little warrens underground while they were waiting to be called to attack the German front lines. The green is moss that's growing because it's so damp down there. The walls are pure chalk. If you run your fingernails down them, you can leave marks easily. So soldiers have carved their names everywhere. The date they were there, the regiment they belonged to, their name, where they were from in Canada. There's all kinds of stuff carved in there. They're still discovering them. There's many, many more that haven't even been found yet. And interspersed among all the chalk are little odd-shaped pieces of flint that you can actually kind of just pull out of the wall. You're not supposed to. Some people bring them home for souvenirs. I've got a nice big chunk in my basement, but don't tell anybody that. So here's a couple of things that made trench warfare so deadly. The machine gun, which brought killing to an industrial level, and gas, which was used by both sides during the war. Quite unpleasant. The guys that weren't killed were maimed badly by these two things. And then we went to Neuville-Saint-Vaast. Now you have to remember that people on the other side lost soldiers as well. This was just down the road from Vimy Ridge, so we stopped here and had a look. You notice the difference in the landscape, right? There's no white headstones anywhere. For every one of those crosses that you see in that cemetery, there are 4 soldiers buried under them. 2 on one side and 2 on the other side at the end. And 44,000 German soldiers buried in that cemetery. The German military sends men a couple of times a year to maintain cemeteries in France. They are not on German land, right? So they get special permission to come and work on it. Cabaret Rouge was another cemetery just down the road from Neuville-Saint-Vaast. And this is not just a specifically Canadian one, but it is important to Canadians for a couple of reasons. And that is that this is where the unknown soldier who was buried in Ottawa came from. So they walked along one of the rows and they just picked out a stone and said, that's going to be the one right there. They replaced it with a headstone here. This one actually says that on May 25th, 2000, we removed the soldier's, an unknown Canadian soldier's body from this grave site, was disinterred, taken to Ottawa, and put in the tomb of the unknown soldier at the National Cenotaph. So a lot of people, as you can see, they visit that particular grave and leave something there. That's the location where Corporal Sorillo was killed last year. Okay, so then that was our World War I stuff done. We jumped on a bus, and it was about a 3-hour drive down to Dieppe. Now, Dieppe is the next war, World War II, and Dieppe is a small city on the coast of France. Quite a popular spot for the British to go for holidays before and during the war, or not during the war, before the war. So it was well known to the Brits, not too far away, probably one of the closest cities to England. By 1942, the Canadian forces had not seen any action in World War II. They were itching to get started. There's some controversy about why this raid actually took place. The Canadians were the main force involved in it. And because some new documents have come to light, I don't know, has anybody here ever read One Day in August? Anybody read that book? Okay, one person. A Canadian author named David O'Keefe has just a couple of years ago published a book based on new evidence. And the original premise of this raid was supposedly to practice an invasion of Europe. Let's see what the Germans are going to give us if we try to land on Fortress Europe. That's been the standard belief ever since the war ended. New documents have come to light that maybe it was something called a pinch raid. Now, if you're familiar with German coding, they had submarines all over the place in the Atlantic Ocean, and they used a coding machine called the Enigma machine. You've probably seen the movie, what's it called? Not a beautiful
Imitation
monument.
game.
Imitation.
Imitation game.
Imitation game, thank you. Thank you very much. Imitation game, where they tried to break the code, based on a bunch of rotors, almost infinite number of possibilities to code things. Rumor had it that Germany was coming, they had a 3-rotor machine that could code messages to the U-boats. Rumor had it that they were inventing a 4-rotor, which would be virtually impossible to break. So what they were trying to do here, according to these documents, was get the plans or a copy of this new machine to see if they could have one to break German code. Ian Fleming, the guy that wrote all the James Bond movies, was heavily involved in this raid, and they think that he had something to do with the commandos that were looking, going specifically to find this Enigma machine and coding sheets. Be that as it may, the raid turned into a disaster. Whatever the reason was, it was a disaster for Canadian troops. And to this day, we're really not sure why they were put in that position. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the raid itself. Dieppe is a fairly sized town. I would say it's probably about the size of Collingwood, maybe a little bit smaller. And there are 2 very tiny villages on either side, one called Pourville, one called Puys. The original plan called for a 3-pronged attack with some little diversionary things happening on the edges. The main force was to go into Dieppe, land on the beach right in the town, force their way onto the beach and into the town, while the 2 invasions forces on the outside were to come around from the back and pinch in and try to hold the town for as long as they could. See what the defenses looked like and see how long they could hold it and then withdraw and just go back to England. So the Royal Canadian Regiment landed in Puys, the South Saskatchewan landed in Pourville, and the rest of them came into Dieppe on the main force. There was no preliminary bombardment. However, on their way across the English Channel, they ran into a small convoy of German vessels, which fired on them, and they exchanged fire, and that sort of got the attention of the guys in Dieppe. Thought, something's going on out here. Maybe we should stand at the ready just in case somebody's coming. So the Germans were prepared for it. No bombardment to soften up the defenses before they got there. Dropped some smoke so they couldn't see what was going on. It became a confused, chaotic landing.
Excuse me, where's
Yes.
Dunkirk in relation?
Dunkirk's farther north than this. Okay, up the coast, about 100 miles, maybe not quite that far. So we went to Puys first to see where the Royal Regiment landed. And that's what the beach looks like. And while we were standing there, sort of getting our bearings and figuring out why was this place important, my buddy and I spotted a little dark blob way down on the beach, and we thought we should go see what that is. You can see it on the right. It's a German bunker that fell off that cliff due to erosion. So it took us about a half an hour to walk down. It's a lot further than it looked. When we got there, this is what was left of it. No doors, there were steel doors. They've all rusted off. Concrete's a little smashed up from wave action falling off the cliff. But that would have been a German machine gun bunker situated on the top of the cliff, waiting for something to invade the coast of France. So there's a memorial to the Royal Canadian Regiment. When you travel to these places, the Canadian maple leaf is prominent everywhere. They love Canadians along here. So then we got to the Dieppe proper, and this is a big wide beach that the tanks and the soldiers had to cross. It just gives you an idea what the coast of France is like. Chalk cliffs with tidal flats out into the ocean. We're going to go back to Dieppe in a second, but this is Pourville, where the Saskatchewan Rifles landed. Now this is a little river that goes through the middle of the village. The plan was to land on this side where the camera is, so they didn't have to cross it. However, in the dark, in the morning, the tidal currents took them past this river, and they ended up landing on the far side, and they had to fight their way across. The lieutenant colonel, his name was Cecil Barrett, won his Victoria Cross, getting his men across. He ran across that bridge about 15 times, telling the guys, come on, we can make it. Come on, we can make it. Come on, we can make it. And by virtue of that, and withdrawing his men as safely as he could, he won the Victoria Cross. And there's a little plaque on the side of the bridge there. Okay? So we're still in Dieppe. This is the next morning. We walk the beach. Now you can see how wide that beach is. And it's stones about the size of that. Okay? When you try to walk on them, it's very difficult. They move underneath your feet. It's like walking through grain on a grain bin or something like that. It's just not very stable footing. Tanks could not gain traction on it. Soldiers could not gain traction on it. And they got kind of bogged down on the beach. One of the regiments that landed there was the Essex Scottish. They were from around Windsor. And the Mont Royal Fusiliers were sent in reserve after the fact. So there's monuments to all the regiments that landed on the beach, right on the beach. But here's the view from where the Germans would have been sitting. The beach is behind us, and then there's a big wide esplanade to get across. You can see that they had a tremendous amount of land to try and get across to get to the machine guns hiding in all the buildings. Terrible, terribly planned raid. So up on top of the hill is the ubiquitous Canadian cemetery of all the men who got killed. Okay, about 6,000 roughly, maybe not quite that many, attempted a landing in Dieppe. Only 2,000 made it back to England. The rest were killed or captured by the Germans.
Anything for the Royal Hamilton laid into there?
Yes, there is. Yeah. So I'm an ex-marine engineer. I worked on the ships from Collingwood for 10 years before I became a teacher. So when we crossed over the mouth of the Seine, I just had to take a picture of a boat go by. So that's us crossing the Seine at Le Havre on our way to Juno Beach. Now, Pegasus Bridge is an important part of the D-Day landings. We landed in the morning. However, there were paratroopers that landed here at the bridge at midnight on June 5th. They came by horse and gliders. This is a fabulous place to go and visit if you ever get there. They have a fantastic museum, and the tour guides are absolutely fabulous. We sort of showed up there out of the blue, and this guy was kind enough to take us around and tell us everything that had happened there. So this is a mock-up. It's not a true glider, but they do have the remains of one there that you can actually look at, that the paratroopers landed. The gliders landed. There were guys that actually parachuted, but these gliders landed within, I would say, from here to the next building over from the bridge. So they were spot on when they landed. Major John Howard captured those bridges in next to no time. So you can get souvenirs here. Everything's about D-Day when you get to Pegasus Bridge. And they have a few tourist traps too. Oh, I mean cafes. Yeah. So yeah, I've got a beer bottle like that on my cupboard at home. So. We had a great lunch there. We all ordered something different, and we just shared it amongst ourselves. But it was really quite, for the place that I thought was going to be a really sort of tacky place, we got quite a good lunch there. So from there, that was on our way to Juno Beach. Now, I'm just going to try and give you some bearing about the places that I'm going to talk about for the next little while. I wish I had a pointer. The maple leafs in the water at the top represent Juno Beach proper. That's where the Canadian forces landed on D-Day, June 6, 1944. It consists of 3 little villages right on the coast. Courcelles-sur-Mer, Bernières-sur-Mer, and Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer, sur-Mer being on the water, on the sea. We stayed here in a town called Bayeux, which is where the famous Bayeux Tapestry is housed, if you've heard of that. And we did day trips from Bayeux out to all these places. So we visited, you see the white maple leaf and the red crest? Just in from the water there? That's a Canadian cemetery. We visited all 3 of those little villages on the coast. We came down here to a place called La Menil-Patrie, and we went farther off the map, down here below Caen, to a place called Falaise. So I'm going to talk about all those places as we go through here, and sort of take you day by day what we went and visited. So our first stop was the Juno Beach Center. For many of the teachers on our tour, this was the first time they'd ever seen this, but I have actually been here before and done the tour there. So they wanted to meet all the staff, and we got a tour of the beach and sort of got a feel for this place. It was sort of our base of operations. These are the pictures of its construction back in 2003. Courcelles-sur-Mer itself, the town, is quite a popular tourist destination for French people. It's right on the coast, and there's all these condos. It's much like Collingwood. Anyway, we managed to get some land from the French, and over the course of a year, we built the Juno Beach Center. Very distinctive architecture. It's sort of shaped like a pinwheel. It has 5 points that represent sort of the 5 points on the Canadian maple leaf, 2 at the bottom and 3 on the spikes. It also represents the 5 beaches of D-Day: Utah, Omaha, Juno, Gold, and Sword. So there are some reasons why it's built the way it is. You know, the architects like to do that kind of thing, make it kind of symbolic. How do I go back? Okay, these are our fundraising plaques that they have out front, so you can buy one of these. Our tour, we all chipped in $20 and gave a donation to Juno Beach Center. There's a plaque now on one of these plinths here that says 2014 Teachers Tour dedication sort of thing. So you can do that by mail. And if you have a loved one who's lost in the war, you can buy a plaque on their behalf. It'll have their name and your name on it. Sort of helps keep the place running. So we toured the beach, the actual beach where the soldiers came. And there's Jen giving us our tour. She's again a university student. These are some of the obstacles that the Germans planted under the tidal board on the ocean floor, so that it would spear landing craft as they came in and tried to unload men and equipment. They're now hauled up on the beach and they're on display for visitors to see. They do quite a number on the bottom of the ship. The sands shift all the time on the beaches of France. This was buried for many, many years. It's a German bunker with a tow brook at the top. It would have been manned by a crew of probably a squad of about 12 guys, specifically to guard against an invasion on the beach. It was covered with sand. Somebody, you know, as the sand shifted, noticed some concrete. They excavated it fully, and now you can go in and tour it. So, they have a nice entrance that goes into it. And I want to talk to you about this picture. These are supposed ventilation holes. Okay, well, air circulates through the bunker when the men are stationed in there, but it's a booby trap. You notice that there's one above the other. If you were to throw a grenade into the top one, it would just make a trip and come back and at the bottom of your feet. So to prove it, we put some stones in, and sure enough, they came with the bottom. Sneaky, eh? Because it's the anniversary of the war, the Juno Beach Center has started a millennial project, and they've got these stands for soldiers, Canadians who were killed on the beach. About 329 Canadian soldiers were killed the morning of the D-Day invasion. Each one of these plaques represents one of those men. And this particular gentleman, Jack McGowan Kay, was from Collingwood, and we'll talk more about him in a minute. So here's St. Aubin-sur-Mer, one of the beaches that we landed on. It's now a tourist town, much like Wasaga Beach. This was Canada House, iconic house, probably one of the first buildings that was liberated after the Canadians landed on the morning of June 6th. That's what it looked like in 1944. That's what it looks like today. Totally restored, owned by a couple from Paris. They don't live there. They have people who live there in the summer for them and look after all the guests. They get thousands of visitors every summer. Queen's Own Rifles took that house. So just to prove that I was actually there, I got my picture taken in front of it. That's me with the black shirt on. We're getting a little history lesson. Because we were a special group, we actually got to go in the house. Most people don't get to go in. So after the tour, we got our picture taken on the front steps. It's pretty cool. It's well worth going to see. So after we toured Canada House, we walked up through Bernier-sur-Mer, Rumor has it these are tank tracks. I'm not sure they are. I'm not sure they had curbstones like this in World War II. I think they're probably bulldozer tracks, but it's fun to pretend that they're tank tracks. If you can see all the chips out of the curb here. We pretended that a tank had actually driven up the road we were walking. Could be, could be. So we walked through Bernier-sur-Mer, and every building that we walked past had bullet holes in it. The stones were all chipped, remnants of the war. This is a church on the right there. Oops. Which brought us to this monument on the side of the road on the outskirts of town. Now, at the start of my lecture tonight, I talked to you a little bit about a guy named Garth Webb. He belonged to the 14th Field Artillery Regiment that came through this town in support of the infantry. They got to the edge of the town here, and that stone wall behind us, going down that roadway, was there during the war. And from that wall on, it becomes agricultural fields, lots of sugar beets and wheat and grain and things like that. However, they ran into a disaster right here on this field. Garth was instrumental in getting this monument put up at the corner of the field here on the road in memory of his buddies that were killed in an attack right here in this very spot. So they had 4 guns set up along the tree row here. The infantry was advancing towards the tree line in the distance. The Germans had a Junkers 88 gun set up in one of those copses of trees that they didn't know about. By the time they had the guns all set up, the Germans had found their range, and they destroyed every single one of the guns set up on the edge of the field. And there were about 12 soldiers with the regiment that was killed in that attack. So Chris was telling us all this as we stood there. You know, this is sort of like the final push out of the coastal area into Normandy proper. But as we were sitting there, standing there, listening to Chris give his lesson, there were 3 cars parked just to our right there, just off the picture to the right. 3 cars sitting there, and as we were standing there getting our lesson, people got in the cars and drove away. Now this is what makes these trips so much fun. As we were standing there were holes in this wall where tanks had actually driven through, but there was this house on the other side of the road. Okay, a nice big manor house that's from probably about the era of the French Revolution, maybe sooner. And some outbuildings, some barns that belong to that house. It's all been separated now. The property's all been divvied up. But the contractors were the people that were in the cars, and they were looking this property over. So there was a woman with 2 children there, and we had, I think, about 5 people that were totally bilingual on our trip with us. Started talking to her, said, you know, you own this property? You know, what's going on? She said, yeah, I just bought this property. She bought this building and this building. This one was built in 1834. The one on the right was from about the 1700s. She was going to renovate them and turn them into guest houses or a house for herself. And with this nice little courtyard in between them. She says, but I run into a bit of a problem. We said, oh, yeah, what's that? Well, I don't have any hydro, so I've got to run hydro from the road in. And I don't have any water, so I've got to drill another well. She says, it's going to cost me about another $100,000 or more. And then she says, and to boot, this little section of this building is from the Napoleonic era, and I've just been told by the Historical Society that I can't tear it down. Her plan was to tear it down. Now she's got to renovate it. She says, that's going to be about another $1 million. She was not happy. Anyway, as we were standing there talking to her, one of our representatives from the Juno Beach Center noticed these rose bushes growing in the courtyard. She says, wait a minute, there's a story to these rose bushes. She says, I recognize this place. I've heard of this place. So she said to the woman, can you tell us a story of the rose bushes? And she said, well, certainly I can, but my mother would be able to tell you even better. So she got on her cell phone and she phoned her mother. So, my nose is not working here. This is the woman that bought the property. She just oozed money. Oozed money. Oh, sorry. And this is, okay, let me move this over just a smidge. This is the woman that bought the property, and this is her mother who showed up after the phone call. So Mom brought a book with her, and she says, I was a girl, I lived here when I was a girl during the war. And Marie F. said to her, well, what's the story about the rose bushes? I heard that 4 Canadian soldiers were murdered and buried there. And she said, well, no, that's not exactly true. She said that the 2 buildings that you're standing between were actually field hospitals that treated both Germans and Allied soldiers by the hundreds. And anybody that died in the field hospital was buried in this courtyard temporarily. So many, many soldiers had actually been buried in the courtyard that we were now standing in. The roses were planted as a memorial to the Canadian soldiers who died there. So that was quite interesting. So just up the road from where we were at that property is the true Canadian cemetery for all the soldiers who were killed during the D-Day invasion. It's called Benny-sur-Mer. And I've been there several times, and it's one of the most peaceful places on the planet. When you walk in there, it's unbelievably tranquil. And every time I leave, I'm in tears. But when we went there, the Juno Beach Center had a fabulous, fabulous activity for us while we were there. Every one of the teachers who was on the trip was assigned a soldier who had been killed in the Second World War from their hometown or from very close to their hometown that was buried at Benny-sur-Mer. I was assigned a soldier by the name of Jack McGowan Kay from Collingwood. Never heard of him before. My buddy Tom there is from Aurelia. He was assigned a chaplain who grew up just around the corner from his family home. Never heard of the guy before. So it was very educational for us to find out about these local personalities who we didn't know, but we now found out had been killed during the war. So what we did was, Jenna here from the Juno Beach Center said to me, can you bring some paper from your school and some crayons? We'll do rubbings of the headstones of all the soldiers that we've assigned to the teachers. That way they'll have a memento of the guy. And there was a life story that went along with each soldier. So we all spread out, and in each one of these cemeteries there's a little book that tells you exactly where everybody's buried. You can find the plot, the road, and the grave site. So they're not that difficult to find. It's just an awful lot of them. So we all went around and found the soldier that we had the name of, and we helped each other do a rubbing with a wax crayon of the headstones. I had nobody helping me, but it was so ironic. It was just a little tiny bit breezy that afternoon, so 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the paper just wouldn't stay just right. And as I'm struggling on the headstone that I'm rubbing, a little boy, about 10 years old, blonde as blonde can be, Mister, would you like some help? There was a little Dutch boy named Henry on his holiday with his parents, came over and helped hold the paper down for me. I'll never forget that kid as long as I live. So we're back to Jack McGowan Kay. This is the soldier that I was assigned, and I had never heard of before. So I took a rubbing of his gravestone and brought it home with me. And as I was reminiscing about my trip, I happened to be talking to one of my fellow teachers. She's here tonight. Her name's Jean Hare. And I said, Jean, I had the best trip. You know, this guy, Jack Kay, I'd never heard of him before. He's from Collingwood, believe it or not. And I got a rubbing of his headstone. And she says, what's his name? I said, Jack Kay, John McGowan Kay. She says, Kay? Well, I went to school with a lady named Bonnie Kay. She says, I think her dad was killed in the war. So she said, I'm gonna phone her. So Jean goes home. She phones Bonnie Kay. Sure enough, this is Bonnie's dad. Small world, eh? Small world. And just to add another little wrinkle to it, he lived 2 doors down from where my wife grew up on Beach Street. Not at the same time, obviously, but you know, how coincidental is that, right? So Jack Kay was a Scotsman who came to Canada as a young man, 17 years old, became a gardener, lived in Barrie, started moving a girl from Collingwood, and ended up joining the army. He was a tank commander with the 1st Hussars. The first Hussars were a cavalry unit that then became an armored regiment. So he was a tank commander in charge of a tank landing on the beach, at Juno Beach. Now, you may or may not know about Hobart's Funnies. Does anybody here know what Hobart's Funnies are?
No.
A couple of people. Hobart's Funnies. Hobart was, I don't know his first, Percy Hobart, was the brother of Bernard Montgomery, who was a British general. And he saw the potential in army tanks to specialize them into some kind of different kind of fighting machine, rather than just having a gun on them, a big artillery gun and a machine gun. Let's do something special with them. So they retrofitted some of them to become bulldozers to help push their way off the beach. They retrofitted some of them with a chain flail on the front that would rotate and blow up any mines in front of the tank as it drove down the beach. They retrofitted some of them with skirts and aprons around them and turned them into actual boats. Okay, these were called duplex drive Shermans. They actually had propellers on the back of them, and when they raised the canvas curtain around it, it became buoyant. A 32-ton tank floating in water, believe it or not. Okay? And it worked. They said it was just the slickest thing they'd ever seen. However, the one little problem was rough water. It's not like a steel hull. Okay, it's just held up with inflatable ribs and some hydraulic struts. And if the waves get too high or too rough, they'll collapse. So I'm going to take you right back to the very start of the story. So these guys are assigned a duplex drive tank. It's in a landing craft, and they've got orders not to land on the beach before 7:30. Well, the way the landing craft is sailing, they're going to get there about 7 o'clock. That's too early. The water is rough, so they make a big circle of the English Channel, just far enough to bring them back in at 7:30. And as they're doing that big circle, they get the order, we're not going to launch the duplex drive tanks. It's too rough. We're going to land them right on the beach. So don't. So the guys took all the struts down, took all the canvas down, took everything down, thinking that they were just going to drive on the beach. Just got that done. They got the order, we're going to launch the tanks. So they put them all back up again as fast as they could. And they did launch them. And they got under the water, and it was really rough. It was really rough. So there were two squadrons of the 1st Hussars that got put ashore that way. They got launched about 3,000 yards from shore. Okay, that's a long way. That's almost 2 miles out. Okay, and these things only go 1 mile an hour. Okay, Germans got lots of time to wait for you, right? So in they come. And B squadron did not too bad. Jack McGowan K was part of A squadron, one of the first tanks to hit the beach. And as the tank touched bottom, he said, deflate the ribs, get the curtain down at the front so we can get the gun in action. And as that curtain went down, the tank swamped. It filled with water completely. The wave came over and filled the tank completely. On the way in, as he was standing up trying to steer it, Jack McGowan K got shot in the stomach. He was wounded already. But as that curtain went down and they tried to evacuate the tank in the water, their machine gun on the shore was traversing the beach, going back and forth trying to hit as many things as he could. And he was shooting at the infantry when the guys tried to get out of the tank, and as he swung back, he killed Jack McGowan K on the spot. The driver of the tank tried to rescue him. He was holding on to him and he had to let him go. And he said, the last thing I saw of Jack McGowan K was floating in the water. He's now buried in Benny-sur-Mer. He was 34 years old. His daughter Bonnie and his wife only ever got there once to see his gravesite. But There's a really good video about it. If you're interested in his story, if you go on YouTube and Google One of the Boys, you'll find a story. There's about a 15-minute video that the CBC made in 1994 about Jack McGowan Kay, and it's the whole story of what happened.
That's
So I was going to play it for you tonight, but it would take up too much of our time. Okay, so that was probably the most fulfilling part of the trip for me, is to make a connection with that family and that soldier that I'd never heard about before. I find the story fascinating. As sad as it is, I really think that that's the one thing I took from this trip that really made a difference to me. Okay, so now we're past the beach. Okay, we're into July. The Canadians got the farthest on the first morning of the first day of the invasion, but we overextended ourselves. We couldn't go any further without some support, so we had to back up a little bit. Okay, take stock of what was happening. And as we advanced through the Normandy countryside, we were doing pretty good. Canadians were proving their mettle against the Germans. Now, as luck would have it, we were up against a fanatical Panzer Division, the 12th Panzer Division of the Hitler Youth. These were all young, late teens, early 20s, fanatic, Hitler-worshipping teenagers who would fight to the death. They were a little slow in reacting to our invasion, but by July, or middle of June, they got their act together. We were moving in through Normandy, and we came to a village of Ot. And their commander, Kurt Meyer, says, okay, it's time to stop the Canadians. So they counterattacked and stopped us dead in our tracks. There was a huge battle in OT, and we got turned around. Now you can see, I don't know if you can see that, there's a Canadian flag flying in OT. Sorry, I'm probably in the way here. Canadian flags flying everywhere in Normandy. Okay, just outside of the village of OT is an abbey, okay, a monastery, a walled monastery from medieval times. It's probably the highest building in the area. And Kurt Meyer, commander of the 12th Panzer Division, was using that as his headquarters. It gave him a very good vantage point of the whole countryside, what the Canadians were up to. It has an infamous story. When we got in there, we had another history lesson about what happened at Abbey Dardenne. Some Canadians were captured, and they were taken to this place, and they were taken into a little sanctuary just off the abbey, and they were murdered there. And they were buried in a mass grave in this little courtyard. 20 Canadian soldiers were shot in the back of the head. Now, there's some speculation about whether Kurt Meyer actually ordered his soldiers to do it, or if he just pretended he didn't know about it, but gave them his sort of blessing. Whatever the facts, there were Canadian soldiers murdered here and buried here, and it's now a very sort of sacred little place. When you go in there, there's a monument. There's information about each soldier that was found buried there. Oops. And people leave memorials all the time. Sad, sad story. He was tried for murder, for war crimes, for that crime. Was sentenced to death. Was commuted. He spent some time in jail, but then he was freed, and he actually came to Canada and worked as a beer salesman until he died in 1970 something. I'm guessing. Anyway, he was an unrepentant Nazi right to the very end. Okay, and then we drove down the road to Ménilpaty, where the Queen's Own Rifles and the 1st Hussars met their first real challenge. There was a brutal tank fight, an infantry fight in this village. We visit this because there's a monument here to both those regiments, right on the main square of the town. It's not a very big village. It's about the size of, maybe not, no, smaller than Ottawa. About the size of Edendale. Okay, not very big. Few houses. But a lot of Canadian soldiers lost their life in this exact village. So the Juno Beach Center takes all the touring teachers here, and we meet all the 80-year-olds 80-plus-year-olds. We have a remembrance ceremony for the soldiers on the plaque. We lay a wreath. We have a moment of silence for them. It's a little Remembrance Day outside of Remembrance Day for those guys in particular, because I'd never heard of them before. I'm sure many Canadians don't know what happened to these guys in Manille Patrie. It's just a little tiny footnote to the history of the D-Day invasion. But it's significant to Canada because it's Canadian soldiers. So we had a little remembrance there, and we met all the seniors. And they put on a wonderful luncheon for us at the town hall. They're all in their 80s now, but they spent the week before we come cooking, getting the wine chilled, getting the wine decanted, getting their private stock of Calvados brandy out. It's great. It's a fabulous lunch, I think, from what I can remember. And these are some of them. This is Roger, who was a farmer, who was a teenager. These guys were all teenagers during the battle for Manille Patrie. And they just love having the Canadians there to visit with them. And we all cried when we had to leave. They're so thankful of what we did for them. So here's Bayeux, our base of operations. This is showing a picture of what Bayeux kind of looks like by day and by night. The big cathedral there. Then we went down to the British and American sections. This is Lacombe, German cemetery on the way. You can see that it's another different look. Flat headstones. Michael Whitman was a German tank commander who was tenacious, wouldn't give up. He was probably a one-man army against the Canadians. The Allies, as they moved up inland from Normandy beaches. He's buried here. So he's kind of like a folk hero to the Germans. They come and do a pilgrimage to his gravesite. So we went to Omaha Beach, where the Americans landed. That's the view. Looks like Caribbean island, doesn't it? Kind of. So this is what the Germans would have been looking at, seeing this water filled with landing craft and ships. Anybody seen Private Ryan? Saving Private Ryan? This is the cemetery where that opening shot was taken. Okay, where all the American soldiers are buried, and of course the Americans do it upright, right? Gotta have the biggest monument. It's funny, you know, most of the places we went to, we were the only people there. We went to this place. Tour boats land at La Havre, and buses by the dozen bring American tourists down to see all these beaches. So these places were packed with people. So this is Point du Hoc, where the American Rangers scaled. This is the piece that sticks out into the ocean. It's a good landmark for the landing ships. And then this is what the Germans were fighting us with. Coastal batteries, they're still there. Meter thick concrete, well back from the coast. Would never see them from a ship, had to kind of guess where they are based on their muzzle flashes. Way up on the hill. So there's a series of them all along the crest of the hill. Okay, and Arromanches is the village where we decided to build an artificial harbor. So for months they built caissons in England, floated them across, and then sank them and created an artificial break wall. And you can just see some remnants of them there out in the water. Sunken ships and cement caissons are all still there. And that was the place where, after we had made our landfall, they brought all the supplies and hooked up the underwater fuel line and everything. It all came through Arromanches. There was two of these places, actually. The other one that the Americans used was destroyed in a storm on June the 19th. So this became really the only fully operational harbor that the Allies had to supply their troops as they moved inland. They have a great museum here. If you're ever going to get to Arromanches, I highly recommend you go. And great baguette sandwiches as well. So while we were there, we had a little lesson on how the harbor worked. So we were the ships, and we sort of showed how, role-playing how it all panned out. And I had my Montreal Canadiens t-shirt. Okay, so we fought in through Normandy. We captured Caen about the middle of July after D-Day. The fighting for Caen was brutal. The city was pretty well destroyed. It's quite a large city. And we bombed it. Much to everybody's chagrin, we killed a lot of civilians in Caen. the city was reduced mostly to rubble, and it took us a long time to get the Germans out of there. However, we did liberate the city eventually, about the middle of July. As I say, it took about a month and a half, and then we had to fight our way through the bocage of the hedgerows of Normandy. So what happened was, with the Americans coming in from the south and us moving inland straight across through Caen, we sort of created a pincer movement. And Hitler, in his infinite wisdom as commander-in-chief of his forces, ordered a counterattack through the middle of that pincer. So the Germans came into there at the risk of being encircled completely by our forces. That in turn led to a brutal fight as they tried to escape being encircled and having to surrender. So that happened in a village called Falaise, which is probably about 20 kilometers in from the coast. I'd never heard of it before. The main reason I went on this trip is to learn a little bit more about this particular aspect of the war. So I took this picture the day we were there, the picture on the left. That's what the town looks like today. Beautiful spot. That's what it looked like during the war. Okay. It's also famous because it's the home of William the Conqueror, the guy who invaded England in 1066. That's his castle. Spectacular. I never got to go inside it, but it is absolutely spectacular.
That's amazing.
So just outside of Falaise, there's another Allied cemetery called the Bretteville Canadian Cemetery. And we had another remembrance ceremony. You can see the Great Cross in the background between those two guys. Tom's the guy from Aurelia, Norbert's from, where's he from? Gananoque. It's down near Kingston. So we had a little ceremony here, and while we were here, Michelle Barron, the elderly gentleman beside me here, gave a little speech, and he was a teenager. His story is that they hid a Allied pilot in their house that crash landed his plane during the Battle of Normandy, and his father said, "You cannot tell your mother that we had this soldier hiding in the barn, this pilot hiding in the barn, because if they question her, she won't be able to keep a straight face." So they lived with that secret. His dad told him, but he was sworn not to tell his mother, because if they found out that they were harboring this guy, they'd probably all be shot. So he had the most moving words. He said, "There's a special bond between France and Canada. You have come to our country 3 times." Talking about First World War, and the D-Day invasion. He says, "You've come to save us, liberate us 3 times. We can't thank you enough for it." And I'm telling you, that was right from the heart. You know, that guy, I started choking up again. There's nothing like going there to see this in real life. Now, I wanted to show you one particular grave here, and you probably won't be able to read it. He was a Mount Royal Fusilier, 16 years of age. 16 years of age, buried there. And you know, that's what you run across when you're going. If you don't see one that says, "No one unto God," you see one that says age 60, age 17. Just breaks your heart. Brave. Brave doesn't even cut it, right? So one of our last lessons, and I'm just about wrapping up here, you've been very patient, thank you, was point 67, which was a high piece of ground that we had to kick the Germans off of, because from there they could see everything that was going on. So there was quite a battle for point 67. I had never heard of it before. It's on the Caen to Falaise Road, and this is what it looks like today. It's another little parkette that you can go and visit. Again, Canadian flags prominent, plaques all over the place, names of soldiers who gave their lives fighting for this hill. But look at the panorama. You can see why it's such a valuable piece of land in a military way, right? So look how far you can see. So we had a group, our last group shot on the tour per se, and our history lesson about what happened at point 67. That was the final push to get the Germans to move back and start their full-blown retreat. By the end of August, we were in Paris. Okay, so from June 6, 1944, to the end of August, we took the whole summer getting through Normandy, basically. And once the Germans turned and started to run, We had them on the run. And we got one day off, a half a day off, and we went to a flea market at Grey-sur-Mer. There was a band on a little float there, and a dramatic presentation by a couple of girls that was quite entertaining. Lots of junk, you know, one person's junk is another man's treasure. A great lunch put on by the local town council. The French speakers had a great time. Then we had a reception at our hotel, and it was off to Paris for an afternoon. So the last little anecdotal story I'm going to tell you is that one of my best friends is a pilot for Air Canada. And when I told him I was going on this trip, he said, well, tell me, what flight are you taking? So he couldn't, the pilots bid on the flights, they had to pick the flights they want to fly. So he couldn't get the one going over there, the overnight one. But he says, I'll try and get the flight coming back from Paris. I'll bid on it, see if I get it. So he texted me while I was on the trip, and he said, or even before I went, I guess, he said, I got the flight, I got it. So for the whole 10 days, going through, well, my buddy's flying us home. My buddy's flying us home. My buddy's flying us home. Yeah, sure. Here's, yeah, I believe you, yeah, okay. My buddy's flying us home. So he showed up. He was there like 2 days before for his layover, before he could fly back. So he and I got to have a supper together in Paris, which was quite nice. We went out and had supper together. The next morning, he came strolling down to the boarding lounge in his uniform, and I said, this is my buddy Perry. He's telling the truth. Anyway, it made the trip because when we landed in Toronto, we got all kinds of special treatment. You know, we got announced on the intercom and all that stuff with all these great teachers. And when we landed, he kicked the cleaning crew off, and everybody got to sit in the pilot's seat with their picture taken. So it was really a nice capping off to the whole thing. It was a lot of fun. So I'm just going to leave you with a quote here. Oops. I'm going to read this to you because it's probably not that clear. Jack Granstein has written many, many Canadian history books, him and Desmond Morton, and he said this very elegantly in a book called D-Day, The Greatest Invasion. He said, Canadians need to know about this. We need to learn of the great regiments that won the victory, units composed of men from all across the great land. We also need to understand the great courage of all those young men who faced the enemy's fire and, conquering their understandable fear, stayed to fight and to support their friends and honor their country. A band of brothers? Without a doubt. Our greatest generation? Absolutely. Lest we forget. Thank you very much.